Everybody, welcome back to the Beyond the Peloton podcast. I'm Spencer Martin from the Beyond the Peloton newsletter. I'm here with Andrew Vontz from thebetterlab.io, and we have a very special guest, Benji Naesen, co-host of the Lanterne Rouge podcast with Patrick Bro and of YouTube fame at Benji Naesen TV. Benji, this is your third time on the podcast, I believe. It's been about a year since you were on last year during the Spring Classics. How's it going? What's new with you? What's going on?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm actually happy to see you guys again.
It's been a while as well.
And, it's nice to catch up on each other's lives, but also what you guys are thinking about this season and what you expect from the rest of the cycling season, because it's always, what's my take on this season? What's the people on the internet stakes? But you guys are also relatively friendly. So I'd love to hear your take and got to catch up with you as well. But when it comes to updates on Mind, still kicking when it comes to the podcast and with YouTube on the side. And that's basically my life at the moment.
I mean, that and Unbound, of course, right? Like that's kind of your primary focus.
I do see you have the profile of Unbound. It's a massive poster on the wall behind you. You are wearing all gravel gear right now. You're going to go replicate the course to see what these athletes are going through.
Yeah, sure. I'm a major Unbound fan, to the point that I started this podcast not knowing whether it has already passed or whether it's still coming. So
apparently we didn't know either.
Yeah,
so you're good
you're
company.
Not the only one.
Yeah. But will Mark Cavendish win a stage at Unbound? That's the big question.
What? No. But on the other end, I just want to say, when it comes to Unbound, it's like I focus on road cycling, and the way I see disciplines is kind of the way I see different sports. I feel like every single discipline has a learning curve to go through. And for me to go through that learning curve of getting to know all the riders, getting to know everybody, getting to know what the benefits of certain routes and stuff is like, how does this gravel rider benefit in this type of race versus other races? That's all stuff I'd have to learn if I deep dive into it. And I kind of like pro cycling on the road a lot. So I try to spend my time, everything on that. And it's the same in which, for example, if I suddenly want to start getting interested in an F1, sorry, but there's so much to learn for it that initial learning curve sometimes demotivates from jumping into a new discipline or a new sport. Thoughts?
Yeah, completely makes sense. And with gravel, some of the nuances, such as how should one tie their bandana that they use to keep dust out of their face. That's a really critical aspect of gravel. What wax should you use on your mustache? How long should you grow it? These are some of the critical style points. And then, of course,
of gravel.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And I mean, like, actually, Benji, as you noted, this isn't an area of the sport that you follow really deeply, and we have a lot of other important things to talk about. I would like to get your take on something that's going down right now at Unbound. So we've got Matej Mohoric over there.
Yeah.
We've got Greg Van Avermaet. Spencer and I have been talking. We think he's actually dusting out the gold medal colorway for his gravel bike to celebrate his win in Rio on the road during Unbound. But the thing that is kind of like the biggest controversy at the moment is they force everyone, and like, keep in mind at this point, the bike industry has people convinced you need a $15,000 aero gravel bike that can run 2.2-inch mountain bike tires, and you should probably be running, 32 centimeter bars. You want to be as aero as possible. At Unbound, they forced the riders, including the pros, to ride with a gigantic square number plate, and they've been posting over and over on social media, you cannot bend the number. You can't do anything to manipulate it. You can't trim it. And the number plate really is just a vector for the timing chip, which is a tiny sticker on the back of the number plate. What is your take on making pros ride with a gigantic square number plate as if they were BMX riders in the 1970s?
Well, firstly, it's probably a bit overkill, the size of that number plate. But secondly, I'm relatively certain that every single person in that race has the same size of a number plate, right? So will it have a major effect? Probably not. It's just annoying for the riders, which they can fix that in upcoming editions, I think.
We should say Andrew's done Unbound. You did Unbound before it was cool. 2014.
Well, I haven't done the 200. I've done the 100 3 times, and I got second place twice. Yes.
And
Wait, US, is that miles or kilometers?
Miles. It's actually 105
Jesus.
miles, but they call it the 100.
And it's if it's possible, it's somehow harder than it sounds. We're both from the area, but it is miserable. Like it's a miserable.
It's really miserable.
It's so like even though it's June, it's probably so hot. If it's not hot, it's raining and muddy. There's no trees whatsoever. It is like a charming landscape. You know, like there might be some buffalo out there. It's a tall grass prairie, undisturbed since like before human contact. But it's brutal conditions. Like you think, 100 miles, we'll go out and do that in 3.5 hours. That's not a big deal. It's ridiculous. Like how rough these roads are. I guess I kind of get annoyed at Unbound because I'm just like, I remember, like I'm someone who was into a band when they had like 4 followers. Like I remember when it was Dan Hughes and 10 people in a pickup truck out there. And then now it's just, like the bike industry is so clearly just leveraging this to make you buy a $15,000 aero gravel bike that you probably don't need. And it's basically a fun run. It's just like a fun run that they've conned everyone into thinking they need to do. It's cool that people go do it. Like if you want to challenge yourself that way, that's awesome. But I don't know. Like when you have mud pits and stuff that you're running through, that's not a pro bike race. That's not the road racing that Benji and I love.
Maybe. I'll be honest, I haven't watched gravel racing too much, but from a personal perspective, I have a gravel bike since about a month ago. And the reason I, as a human being that tries to exercise relatively regularly, get a gravel bike, it's not really because people are racing on gravel bikes at full speeds in the US and so forth. I'm guessing there's probably people that are like, oh, that's cool, I need to get a gravel bike. But for me, it's more, I live in the UK and I feel like when it comes to driver culture, I don't feel too safe on the roads in the UK. And when I don't feel that safe on the roads, it's partially due to close passes, always the white vans, for example. And a gravel bike allows me to just have a less than a kilometer from my house, go next to a canal on a gravelish towpath for about 15 kilometers straight, just back and forth. Do that twice a day, and I've got a great ride in. I feel safe doing so, except for yesterday because I basically had to avoid a swarm of very offensive geese, but I managed to survive.
They're yelling racial slurs at people, these offensive geese.
Well, interesting point about the relative safety of riding off-road, and I agree. That's definitely one of the things that's attractive in this era of increasingly distracted drivers. And I actually just dropped a recap of my 2014 ride at the Unbound 100 with my friend Blake of Today on Choose the Hard Way. So if anyone, it's an old episode, but I've dusted it off. I brought it out of the archives. I'm like Uncle Rico and Napoleon Dynamite, throwing the football over the mountain one more time. I might retire the episode after this go around. But anyone who is following Unbound closely, unfortunately, and Benji, this will be news to you, but Nicky Terpstra was out on a training ride in Bentonville, the new epicenter of gravel and mountain biking in the United States. And Ivar Slick, former Unbound champion, was with him. They were about 40 miles south of Bentonville. They were on a dirt road. They're going down a blind left-hand corner. Ivar was in front of the group, and then they unfortunately heard him hitting head on a delivery van. So he went into the grill. He was unconscious. He broke his nose. And reading Nicky Terpstra's report of this, and apparently he has described this incident in detail on his podcast. But Ivar Slick is okay, but it was a critical situation. He was unconscious. They had to triage it on the scene because they couldn't get a cell signal. Spencer and I have talked about this a lot. At these events, you're often in such a remote place, like you can't even get a cell signal. And while it is relatively safer, there are people on the road, and anyone, I live in the country actually, and sometimes out on those empty roads, people drive a bit faster and unexpected things can happen when you're going around a corner. So I hope that Ivar Slick recovers, has a full recovery, and that I know he won't be at Unbound. I'm not sure if Nicky Terpstra will be. I think he will be, but I'm glad no one's dead because they could have been.
I will say is like I am kind of a gravel hater, and that is something I was worried about.
You're
Andrew
a
and I
gravel
did
hater, as in
Andrew
like
and I
the
did a
sports
race recently.
or the
Oh no,
recreational
sorry, yeah,
gravel.
of like the races. But I should
Okay.
say I bought a gravel bike recently, and it's my favorite bike that I own. I love riding gravel, like for like my own riding. Like if I had to pick one bike, it'd be my gravel bike. The gravel riding
Yeah.
around my house is amazing. It's like I couldn't recommend it enough to do. I just find that like basically reinventing road cycling. I mean, like we're all going to get together and race bikes. Isn't this revolutionary? It's like, well, yeah, this has been going on for quite some time, folks. And they are charging you a lot of money to race on open courses with cars, often coming the wrong way on remote gravel roads. So that leaves a little bit to be desired. But I guess my serious question for you, Benji, about Unbound is we've seen
Terrifying.
like Ivar Slick came and crushed
Yeah.
everybody. Matej Modric, like, what do you make of this? He's flying to the U.S. It's not an easy place to get to, where Unbound is. I assume he's doing the tour for Bahrain. Do you like Andrew? Do you think he's going to crush everybody? And Benji, do you think this is good preparation for the tour? Is this like showing that maybe he's already planning for his career after he's road racing? I'm having a hard time squaring it in my head, or he just thinks it's fun and wants to do it.
Well, if we look at it from a Moharic's standpoint, I think it's multiple things. On one end, you've got Merida, who probably wants to promote their gravel bikes, so a marketing aspect. Secondly, he became world champion gravel, if I remember correctly, last year.
Yeah.
Which, to that point, Merida might want him even more at that event because Unbound, like, I don't know much about gravel, but everybody that's in cycling right now has heard a hint of what Unbound is, which means it has crossed paths just gravel enthusiasts and also road cycling fans have heard of the term. So it's a relatively big event. It's a big event where and sponsors value their marketing at such events. So that's one thing. So I see that as a good opportunity for Meridan to use Mohoric for their advantage. On the other end, when it comes to the Tour de France, it's always difficult to say, okay, is this the perfect preparation for the Tour de France? Because some riders prepare differently. For example, I think Mohoric is probably going to show up at the Tour of Slovenia in about 10, 15 days, if I remember when the Tour of Slovenia is. But so Unbound, then Tour of Slovenia, then Tour de France. To me, that seems like he probably went to an altitude camp before this, because otherwise you're thinking, okay, where's the altitude camp going to fit in? Is it still going to fit in after Slovenia? I think Slovenia ends on maybe the 17th or 18th. There's some space, but there's not too much left anymore. So for the type of rider Mohoric is, the most important thing is that he doesn't get injured, in my opinion. that's the first thing. Don't crash at Unbound, Mate, please.
It's probably, I mean, what do you think, Andrew? It's not,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it is kind of sketchy, but probably the biggest risk to him is going all the way out there. And this is what happens to a lot of Euros. Oh, it's a gravel race. I'll run gravel tires, and they show up. And it's not really gravel. It's like rocks that happen to be sticking out of the ground, and then they flat or they get stuck in mud. And like Larry Warbus last year, and then they're riding for 7 hours, chasing off the back, which isn't the worst thing for training. It just stinks for you because you didn't get to compete at the front of the race, but it's probably relatively safe. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, or just look at Alejandro Valverde at BWR San Diego about a month ago. I think Valverde was a top contender. I mean, he's been crushing the UCI Gravel World Series for all the Gravel World Series fans out there. He is a top level competitor in professional gravel racing.
Well, is the fight still happening between gravel spirit enthusiasts and the UCI gravel fans?
That's done. The UCI has taken over.
Yeah, I think the UCI has won, and I think, Benji, one of the interesting narratives that's emerging at Unbound this year, and I've actually had Kimo Seymour, who is the executive at Lifetime, that came up with the whole Lifetime Grand Prix, of which Unbound is now a part of that series.
Mm-hmm.
The professional athletes this year, though, to your point, this is the biggest, most important gravel race in the world now. Everyone has heard of it in cycling, it seems. There's zero prize money. So no one wins anything from a prize money point of view. And the American athletes in particular, who probably are not probably, they're not making Tour de France level stage winner money like Mate is. And to your point, most of the value that's created, it's for the sponsors. The event gets the amplification of all of the athletes who come, all of the content that they create around it. I was thinking about this yesterday. Unbound is almost, if we were to compare it to a tech platform, it's almost like the Instagram or Meta of bike racing, where they've invented this event.
Is it like TwitchCon? As in,
yeah, it is a bit. It's a bit
the
like
cyclists that go there are bloody great cyclists, but they're partially also influencers, because like Freddie Ovett, I know Freddie Ovett, not necessarily from his gravel racing, but because I see his Instagram rides with Mathieu van der Poel all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the value that they're creating through the content that they create, it's for themselves, but it also predominantly it favors the promoters who have created this whole series that's a container for everything that's happening inside of it. As far as Mate Mohoric and his chances at this race, or how does it impact his Tour de France? As we've talked about on Beyond the Peloton many times, the ground is undefeated in the history of bike racing, and it can radically alter the course of cycling history, as we've seen so many times this year with Jonas, with Wout, with so many other riders, which we'll talk about. Tadej last year in 2023. I think, there's a non-zero chance that Mate goes down. I don't think that's the most likely thing that would inhibit him from winning the race. It definitely would be mechanical related issues or tire choice. And in fact, I still think he is going to win this race. So he is my pick. My secondary pick is actually Albin Licata. We talked about this on the last episode. Previous Leadville record holder, Cape Epic winner, but just like an absolute machine, diesel. And I think he's got the palmarès and the experience to like go deep in a race that's this long and this hard. Mohoric, something that kind of alarmed me. I sent Spencer this Instagram reel yesterday. I believe that Mohoric arrived, I think, on Thursday. So this guy, he's done a transcontinental flight 2 days before the race, gets off the plane, goes out, rides a section of the end of the course, which he's been told is basically like the best gravel. I've ridden that before, and it is like, it's relatively tame, well-graded, compact gravel. It's not the gigantic Flintstones that you find in other places on the course. And his reaction, for anyone out there who's a fan of Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book series, in one of the books, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, there's a moment where there's a spot in the universe where people can go and they can stand on a full-scale map showing them where they are in the universe. And they're so infinitesimal and small in proportion to the universe that they actually die when they realize how insignificant they are. When Mohoric went out on the course and saw what it was actually like, and then was on camera talking about this experience, he looked terrified, and he it seemed like he had just realized he had gotten into something that was quite a bit gnarlier from a surface point of view than he realized. And I got the feeling he was probably out there on like 35s or 38s, and he realized, what can I fit in my frame?
Yeah, no, so it's literally the biggest tire you can fit in the frame is the tire you should run.
Right. So I think he's going to be on probably gigantic tires he's never ridden before. I have to say, even having just hopped over from Europe, you have to imagine the sensations are going to be great in his legs on the day of the race, though, right?
Well, yeah, as Benji said, probably, almost certainly coming from an altitude camp, physically is going to be great. Let's just say what you predict happens. Mate wins. What's his name? Albin Licata. This guy is a beast. But let's just say they go 1-2, just a hypothetical. Mm-hmm. Is this an existential threat to U.S. gravel racing if you just start to see Euros like Benji coming over and just dominating these events? Benji's winning
Euros
BWR.
Like Benji. I'm not sure about that.
just look at the results of Gravel Locos, which was 2 weeks ago. That's kind of seen as the canary in the coal mine, the event that's most predictive of who will do well at Unbound. The top 13 out of the top 15 places were riders from outside of the United States. So like we're already there. Foreign global riders are dominating American gravel now at the highest level. I will say I don't believe Keegan Swinson was at that race, and Mohoric and his comments about Unbound, he has very high regard for Keegan. Keegan did take fifth at the Gravel World Championships in 2023, and he was way back on the grid and wrecked early on in the race and had a horrible start at Gravel Worlds. So Keegan, I think, definitely is going to be a contender. I personally, though, just like someone with the palmarès of Mohoric, Tour de France stage winner, classics winner, able to go super deep late in a race as long as Milan San Remo, it just seems a bit silly to me when people are skeptical of, like, can this guy handle this?
Exactly.
It's like, come on,
really
come
triggers
on.
me. Yeah. Do you know what the training rides are like at these altitude camps?
From a perspective of a non-follower of that discipline, riders like the Euro boys like Mohoric showing up and contending in those races, does that not just help the discipline grow?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's what I like to see. I'm quite agnostic, or even to the point where I root for non-Americans for reasons I would have to go to therapy for, and we would have to unpack on the show. But
Jesus Christ.
But I tend to like to see it's like if Tadej came and dominated, I'd just be pumped. I'd be like, oh, this guy's so good. This is so fun to see. I do kind of worry, though, does your average, like I was out on a group ride yesterday with like Unbound target audience, or like people that would go to Unbound and see the pros and then buy those expensive bikes. Yeah. Like, do they start to check out if it's just the same people winning big road races versus winning gravel? That would be the one question I would have, because that kind of happened with mountain biking here, where Norba was huge. The Americans started to not be able to keep up with the Europeans, and now mountain biking is almost exclusively taking place in Europe. And I mean, I love it. I love watching cross-country mountain bike racing, but it's definitely not the force it used to be in the US.
Yeah, America decided you just need to get stoned and ride a chairlift.
Oh my God. Yeah. If you're riding uphill in the US mountain biking, you're doing something wrong. It's not allowed. One guy I do want to shout out, Adam Roberidge. I guess he's technically North American, but there's like these Quebecois and gravel that are really, really good riders, like quality, almost world tour level riders. Roberidge would be someone that I'm curious to see how he does against this field. He's a really good rider and a good gravel racer.
Yeah, absolutely. And had a big ride at Gravel Locos with what is now known as the Poutine Mafia. No joke.
Yeah, these guys don't mess with these Quebecois. But
yeah.
Also, someone reached out on Instagram, asked me how I thought Ian Boswell would do. I do think I mentioned this because Ian, I believe, still has a full-time job at Wahoo. I just think the level, I mean, as Dylan Johnson says on every video, the level is higher every race. It's just getting to the point where, like, if Tadej came and did this race out of the Giro, he might be slightly undertrained compared to the top guys that are doing 30 to 40-hour weeks every week. We could argue if that's actually the right thing to do or not, but people are training so much, you really can't half time this anymore like you used to be able to.
I can tell you.
Yes. So Benji,
I don't follow the sport enough.
Yeah, Benji, do you have any predictions for how you're going to place in Unbound 2025? Because I think we've convinced you to compete.
It's a good course.
Yeah, I
for
think you've convinced me to compete. I think I reckon I could follow for a solid 35 seconds, and then I'll form a gruppetto. I think that's a fair assessment.
And there are actual fun gravel races you can do that are not Unbound.
Fair enough. So should we move on to the world tour? Maybe,
the real racing.
You mentioned Tadej. I could see Tadej showing up at Unbound next year. I could see it happening.
Honestly, nothing would surprise me, because when there was all these rumors, he's going to do the Giro d'Italia, he's going to do the Giro, I was like, this is so stupid. He's not going to do the Giro and jeopardize his tour chances. Lo and behold, the bank transfer went through. He does the Giro, I mean, unbelievable, I will say. The guy looked
check cleared. Yeah.
incredible. Benji, to go back and re-listen to like your episode after Aropo, and you and Patrick's like, he was looking back. He looked tired. It's like, oh, just wait to see what will happen.
Yeah, you gotta have some hope, you man. Like, come on. Otherwise, we're watching a race. We want some kind of tension.
Hey, I lived through the Froome
sometimes
years.
you create that drama yourself.
I know what no hope feels like. Chris Froome winning everything he entered for years and years and years. But so Tadej, I think we can all agree, pretty amazing performance, no weaknesses. He lost no time on any GC contender at any point in the race. I don't think I've ever seen that happen. It's incredible. I guess to start, do we think Tadej wins the Tour de France? Big question right up top. Can he come out of this Giro, and should he be the favorite for the Tour?
Well, no answer to that is very, very black and white. It needs to be a bit nuanced. And then we look at each actor in the Tour de France race. And let's start off with the outsider favorites is what I would classify these riders at. Someone like Remco Evenepoel, Roglic. Roglic was actually the best of the gang when it comes to his instant standing up after the crash in Catalonia. And after that, Basque Country?
No, yeah,
Jesus
you're right.
Christ.
Yeah,
Catalonia.
Because
sorry?
Yeah, Catalonia was Tadej crushing everyone, I think, and then
exactly.
Crash was at Basque Country.
So the crash, Roglic was best off of the guys that crashed when it comes to the GC riders there. If I then look at the injuries that he sustained, yes, he had to skip the likes of Ardennes, but he's probably going to have a relatively normal preparation for the Tour de France, is how I look at that then. And then I look at Remco Evenepoel, who is then the one next to that, where I'm like, okay, he had a broken shoulder blade, a broken collarbone. That reduces your training, that changes your rhythm when it comes to your plan of the season. On paper, a collarbone alone would have been, okay, you're off the bike for a little bit, you can start training on the trainer, and then you can start riding outdoors relatively quickly. Adding that shoulder blade broken to that extended the recovery time a little bit. So I'm curious to see what he does at the Dauphiné first before I'm guessing when it comes to the Tour de France. But reality is, before this Tour de France starts and before these injuries happen to the riders, I was thinking, okay, it's Vingegaard versus Pogačar, and Roglic and Remco were for me, okay, these riders are going to be fighting for whatever's left on the podium. But then you look at Pogačar, he just rode the Giro d'Italia, like you mentioned. I will say, however, he won 6 stages, but I do believe he could have won 8 to 9 stages. There were multiple stages, like the Passo Brocon stage, where his team, they could have quite literally controlled the race and won the stage, but they didn't do that for political reasons, I guess, within the Peloton, which I'm not a firm believer of the making friends in the Peloton will result in something later on. But it's like UAE has chosen in multiple stages to ride more conservatively, also to save their team, but also to save Pogačar a little. Pratiritivo was a perfect example of winning a stage on eco modus, is how I'd say. And
on eco mode.
Wow.
He kind of was. I mean, you say, Benji, I couldn't agree more about this like myth of you have to make friends. When has it ever helped anybody? I guess you could say Armstrong kind of incepted Ulrich, and then Ulrich should have raced away in 03 and won that stage and won that race. You could say maybe then, but in modern times, I don't know. I don't really see
maybe
the benefit.
Valverde in the Vuelta X amount of years ago. I don't know the exact year. I think there was a situation there where he benefited, but then I look at, you hear so many riders and staff members, like multiple during the Grand Tour, commenting, okay, he's being greedy and so forth. But then Steinhauser ends up winning on Passo Brocon. EF ain't going to be like, oh, thank you, Pogačar. Tomorrow we're going to be riding for you on the mountain. I think the possible effect comes, okay, Pogačar has a mechanical or a crash, and a GC rider disrespects the unwritten rules, rides off. EF might step in and say, come on, guys, have some respect. That's the only moment where I see that paying off, maybe. But I think that's very limited, and I think the majority of the friends in the Peloton storyline is a bit of an illusion, to be honest. But to continue on the point, Pogačar, Giro in his legs, I actually don't think it will be a major effect. Yes, there's some stages in there with 8,000 kilojoules where high energy expenditure, that stuff you need to recover from. But I believe Pogačar can do that relatively, also because Vingegaard is coming back from a heavy injury. Like, half of his lungs didn't work after his crash, and knowing that from that point onwards, that he just arrived on altitude in Tignes, I think the other day, towards the end of May. I think that's on the, I might be wrong, but I think that's on the same day as Pogačar arrived on altitude last year after his wrist injury. That's a limited time of preparation, especially because he's going to be a little behind compared to the roadmap they initially set out, quite a bit behind, which everybody has a bit of a question mark. But if I'm a team, I'd rather have a question mark because someone conservatively, in between brackets, won the Giro d'Italia versus someone who quite literally had a horrible crash a few weeks ago, a month and a bit ago.
Yeah, and it seems like Visma Lisa Bike, I think that they are masters of obfuscation, and I think that, you know, that's in their favor at this point.
We say it with love, Richard Pluga, friend of the podcast. We'd love to have you back on, Richard.
No. I mean that, you know, as
that was a good podcast.
As someone who's been a communications executive and has been a journalist for a long time, I think that they're playing it exactly right. Why would you show your full hand and tell people exactly what's going on with your riders until the day that you show up at the race? I think having the element of surprise is in Visma Lisa Bike's favor. And even though I personally know that, like, we're going to see GC Wout and it's his year, like, that's what I think is going to go down at the Tour de France. You know, and I have a bigger take about Pogačar.
Come on.
Huh?
Jorgensen. Gotta give him some credit. He's from the US.
Yes, I like Matteo a lot. He did say he's too tall, which I don't know if I believe with. I don't know if I believe in that. I don't know about this year. Maybe,
yeah.
I don't know, because it is actually hard. You have a hard time imagining, but he was so good at Paris-Nice, you know, when you start to think back on that. We could debate if Remco just made a mistake, or, you know, I don't really know how you make a mistake of saying, Matteo Jorgensen and Brandon McNulty are going up the road. I'm going to let that go. That seems a little odd to me, that if physically he could respond, that he wouldn't respond to that. But Matteo was so good at Paris-Nice. I probably would pick Wout if I got to choose one to go for GC, but I don't know.
You have to think though, Spencer.
Seppi exists too.
Well,
yes,
I've got a whole theory.
Yeah, I think that's all true. We do have to consider, like, we think about the rise of the Galacticos, and I think in some people's minds, MVDP and Wout are still like 22 years old. The reality is Wout is 29 years old. The guy is going to win the Tour de France. And what other year would he begin his campaign than this year? Is he going to wait till he's 35? I mean, he's practically ready for the retirement home in the World Tour at this point at 29. If he's ever going to have a shot, this has got to be the year. He has the element of surprise in his favor. You know, it deeply hurts him, not just that he had the wreck that he had, but to see Matthew Van Der Poel have the year that he's had and become the greatest classics rider of all time, probably, you know, that's got to hurt. The guy wants to do something spectacular, I think. And I don't think bagging, you know, a handful of stage wins is the thing that's going to round out his Palmeiras in the way that he would like to do it.
I don't believe in GC Wout. Additionally, because he's also coming back from injury, he's also going towards the Tour de France. He's not sure where he's at right now. He just did Tour of Norway, where he kind of rode in the background a little, which that's fine. You're just coming back from injury. But it's also, I believe in Jorgensen and Kuss for a high position more than I do for Wout, from a perspective of, I'm a team, I've got these riders. When it comes to risk versus reward, what is the best thing we could choose? And especially with the amount of high mountains in the last week, 2,800 meters to Chim de la Bonnette in stage whatever in the third week of the Tour de France. When we saw Wout van Aert on high altitude in the past, he's won mountain stage. He won Ventoux, for example. But it's also there. Was it the Andorra la Vella stage where Quintana pushed through in a group and then he was starting to get a bit in trouble and so forth. But also, in addition to that, did his recovery from his injury, was that focused on, okay, am I going to try and go for a GC and a Grand Tour now, or is that, okay, I'm going to try and get back to the level I was and then build on that? I think there's too many question marks to just pull that out of their hat last minute for the Tour de France when it comes to Wout van Aert. So I think Vingegaard, first of all, is going to be their goal to get him at the start. If he's at the start, that in my opinion, that will probably have the meaning that they have the confidence that he could at least challenge a little bit. It's hard, because if you're before a race, like Pogačar last year, limited preparation for the Tour de France, okay, we've done some tests, you've done some training, hard training days, you've done some fresh tests as well. We've seen some tests after high energy expenditure in your training, whatever, all these things combined. That doesn't simulate a 3-week Grand Tour. So after 2 weeks of a Grand Tour, during this limited preparation, you haven't been able to really prepare for, okay, does Vingegaard after this have the base for the recovery every single day throughout 3 weeks? And I think those are all the questions we're looking at. I think Pogačar is the favorite for the Tour de France right now. And I think that's not controversial to say, based on the fact that Vingegaard hasn't been seen in a race since his crash.
Yeah, I think that's a highly rational view that I think makes a ton of sense. And I think my view is that of a dreamer. And I still believe in GC Wout. And I think things never make sense until they happen, and then they make a lot of sense.
GC cuss would be because Benji, you just laid out a level of logic that's never been on this podcast. Yes, you're absolutely right, but it's not that fun what you're saying. But I will say, to go back on the Giro for a second, those stages that Pogačar was like giving away, quote unquote, I do think those were almost like active recovery days for him, and he got to train almost perfectly through that final week of the Giro. I don't think the Giro is going to take that much out of him. Jonas being so late to go to altitude, that's a huge red flag for me. I mean, what are we? We're less than a month out from the Tour.
Yep.
As you say about the base, I think you were saying this on your podcast with Patrick yesterday. You can look, numbers can look good, but 3 weeks in, like, what are the training numbers might not show how you're going to, like, just like Pogačar last year. Like, I'm sure he looked fantastic in training, and then 2.5 weeks into the race, he's fallen apart because he doesn't have the base. And I think you could probably see the same thing this year. One question, you mentioned Remco, and we got the Dauphiné coming up on Sunday. We're going to see Remco in action. He's talked about as though he's a contender. This is just a question. Has he ever done well on an alpine, like a long climb in the Alps? I don't think I can think of a single time when he has.
Who?
Or not been, by well, I mean, like, now? Finished first.
Yeah. Well, it's very limited very limited data to look at. But the way I see Remco, in my opinion, is that when we saw the races he prepped for last year, the Giro d'Italia, I was looking at the Crans-Montana stage as a stage that he had never anticipated before. He had never done before, which was one of those big monster stages that has 3 major climbs. Now, eventually they did cancel 2 of the 3 climbs, but that's just Giro things. But that's the kind of stage where I haven't seen him prove himself. So basically I'm saying, yeah, you're right. And then when it comes to the Vuelta, like, he won loads of stages. He won a KOM as well, if my memory serves me right. But if we then take a look at the parkour itself, was there really an explanation for that bad day he had in the mountains? Like, I'm wondering then towards the Tour de France, okay, I want to see his consistency throughout the race. I want to see him conquer those major mountains, like the Chim de la Bonnette stage, for example, to Isola 2000. That's some monster stage. That's a crazy stage. That reminds me of the Grenoble in 2022 when it comes to a difficulty level of the parkour. You can light that up if you want. But I'm also then thinking, okay, I personally see Remco as a podium candidate. And it's only because Pogačar rode the Giro and Vingegaard had that accident that I'm considering him as a candidate for potential victory. If those other two have issues, and if Roglic can't find his level, his Visma level at Bora this year, because then Remco is in that storyline. Okay, then he can maybe win if the others have problems compared to previous years.
I think
But
we'll
then
know
it's like, yeah,
in the next week.
we don't know yet.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm looking at stage 7 of the Dauphiné. Like we'll have our answer, right? Because either he's going to, I do think the bad day at the Vuelta last year got waved away so quickly, but we never got an explanation for that. That was not, he was not sick because he was fine right after that. Like, to me, that's a big question mark. Like, what was that about? You know, just you didn't feel good, so you sat up?
It's always possible that someone has a bad day, that because of the bad day you mentally are like, fuck, I can't do it, and you fall through physically and maybe mentally on the other side in that stage. That's perfectly possible. His fighting back in the coming stages after that, that's admirable, and he got quite a bit out of that Vuelta despite GC falling through. But like you say, for GC, that is a question mark that remains unanswered until we have a Grand Tour where he has consistency. And that's the same thing where, for example, Danny Martin is in the Giro. Before the Giro, I had the opinion of, okay, Martinez's level at peak, he can top 5, maybe top 3 with the level that was starting this Giro, but his consistency is unproven. The one Grand Tour that he top 10 was the Grand Tour where he was working for Bernal in 2021. And then look at the other years, and there was inconsistency. He got sick every now and then, which, valid excuse, getting sick. But there were also other days where I was like, okay, he's falling through on days that I didn't expect it. And in the Giro, the consistency was there. So the fact that Remco was never fully consistent outside of maybe the Vuelta of that he won, well, that one, a pattern exists until it doesn't. So he could literally show up and be consistent in this Tour de France. But then the question is he going to have the peak level throughout the entire 3 weeks to be on the same level as the nuclear was at Pogačar and Vingegaard sometimes throughout?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll know. I guess that's what's fun. We'll find out. And if you're screaming at your radio, your car radio right now saying, he won the Vuelta, what are you talking about? I went through, I'm like a truther, a Remco truther. I've gone through every stage of that Vuelta. There was no, like, I got high mountain stage with multiple Cat 1 climbs in it. So
it's not an easy Vuelta, but it's not one with like a heavy backloaded third week. The third week had lower gradients, which is ideal for Remco, which is easier to control. His team was not the strongest at that Vuelta, but the teams that were against him also weren't the strongest, which means that they were just able to keep that. And then add to that the performances that he had on certain days, like on multiple days where he straight up destroyed the competition. Well, those days then are enough you can just defend that. And in a Grand Tour that isn't backloaded, I believe we haven't seen Remco on a very, very tough Grand Tour parkour yet. And I think this Tour de France is that.
I mean, and I think setting all of that aside, whether it's Remco, Jonas, any of these riders, Wout, who were involved in really catastrophic wrecks this year, you just are not the same after something like that happens. And in particular, jumping back into competition for the first month or two, I just have to think that even riders at this level who have crashed a lot prior to the crashes that we saw this spring, this is a little bit different. And I think we're going to need to see, what is the psychological impact for these riders? Is there any hesitance? Do they back off, when in the face of the danger that we know they're sure to face when they're in the Tour? One rider we know will not back off is Geraint Thomas. And I think we really need to get into Ineos. That's what listeners want to hear about. Benji, Spencer, like, any takes on GC Pidcock? Like, what are we going to see from Pidcock this year? Well, are we back into stage hunting mode, or like, what's going on? Are they developing him into a Tour winner?
Benji, am I wrong? He said he's going for GC, right? And I don't know if he knew that this was like being recorded. He said he's going for GC Because at Ineos, if you don't say you're going for GC, then you get stuck working for people. Like, do you know that you're on the record when you're saying this?
I vividly remember him saying during the winter that he wants to prove himself for GC ambitions at the Tour de France. But it's also like last year, thing with Pidcock in mountain stage in the Tour de France, like I haven't analyzed every single Pidcock mountain performance of his life, but he started with the U23 in the Baby Giro with a GC win that was spectacular, and after that everybody was hyping up his GC. But then when he entered the pros, he was more of that classic prospect, which is perfectly fine because he's proven himself in winning Strade, winning Amstel. Some conspiracy theorists might say 2 victories in Amstel, but outside of that, when it comes to the Tour de France,
that might just be a fact. I don't even know if that's conspiracy theory.
I agree, but anyway, we'll continue. Tour de France. Last year, there were a few performances when it comes to Pidcock in the Tour de France that were high climbing level. And then I'm specifically looking at, he was good on Grand Colombier, but Grand Colombier is an interesting one. It's more of a, I don't know. I feel like the Grand Colombier last year was more selective than initially anticipated, but it's also that type of climb that I'd expect Pidcock to do well on. And it was more on Puy de Dôme that he was super impressive to me, that he held on long, that he was part of that was a good performance by Pidcock, where I was like, okay, if he can consistently do this across 3 Grand Tours, then I believe in GC Pidcock. But then when it comes to his time trial, it hasn't been that great. So that scenario then where there's some weakness too. Well, weakness is a big word, but where he's gonna lose time to the other guys. But then again, what is good for GC Pidcock? Is a top 10 in the Tour de France a good result for Pidcock when it comes to GC? I actually think it is, because next to him, you've got Carlos Rodriguez, who has a solid chance of top 5 in the Tour de France again. So it's just, they've got a nice duo here. But I wonder, Spencer, what do you think when it comes to vulnerabilities when it comes to Pidcocks? Because to me, it seems like it's the high energy expenditure, the multi-mountain stages where he's often dropping earlier than I expect him to.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on Pidcock so much. But I've now settled into, I've just been watching all his like mountain bike race. It's like, this guy is unbelievable. Like, such a massive talent. Yeah. That I think he can do anything he wants. And I kind of think that's his weakness. Like, it's going to sound offensive, but I think his weakness is kind of focus. Like, when he's struggling on these multiple mountain stages, I kind of wonder, well, if he was really just locked in like Geraint Thomas, and that's all he cared about, I don't think he would be struggling in those. And I think he could time trial well enough to compete in the GC if he really put his mind to it. But I don't know if he is incentivized to do that, because what does he really want out of this tour? It kind of seems like he wants to win a stage, and this is me reading between the lines, wants to win a stage, and then he wants to go win the Olympics in the mountain bike, right? Which is only a week after the tour finishes. So I don't know how locked in he's going to be. And this Ineos situation is weird. It's weird. You know, we saw Geraint Thomas at the Giro, gets third. Yeah. That's fantastic, especially for a 38-year-old defensive rider that never takes time on anybody. Like, how is this possible? It's like the meme, how I can't keep getting away with this. But I don't know. Did you sense a little, like, there seemed to be tension with Thymen Arensman, who has kind of taken a step back? Like, if we think of Remco Evenepoel, remember he struggled on the hardest day of that Vuelta that he won. Remember who won that stage? Thymen Arensman. Looked incredible. We haven't seen Thymen Arensman look that good since then, since before he joined Ineos. Apparently gained 5 kilos during the Giro. I don't know how that's possible, but that's not great. That shows that something's not, the chemist at the team and the food truck isn't doing a great job if that's happening. But I don't know.
Apparently that was due to water retention, which I'm not a water retention expert, but apparently he individually retains a lot of fluid in his body. And because of that, his weight started going up and up, which might be related to the fact that he, I think this was an article on In de Leidersstrijd, which you have no clue how to pronounce that, but it's like a Dutch a Dutch newspaper that covers, well, newspaper. It's just a Dutch website that covers cycling interviews every now and then. And I think it was related to fluid retention, and because it was warmer than expected in the first 2 weeks of the Giro, in relation to that, he gained weight or something during the race, which he was above 70 kilos, I think, at the end of the race, which that does explain that it becomes harder to follow people on a climb. Like,
I mean, yeah,
I know the disadvantage of weight on a climb personally.
Hey, I'm right there with you.
When it comes to pro cycling, it's about the percentages. So I won't write off Damon Arensman just because of this Giro, especially because he still got a nice top 10. Yes, it's like 6th and just out of the white jersey behind Tiberi. And it's like, I think it's the same result he got last year at the Giro, but I do think last year's Giro was higher in terms of competitiveness outside of Pogačar this year, of course. And I expect Arensman to be better in the future.
Well, but that's a good point. I mean, if you gain 5 kilos, that's, let's say, 7 watts per kilo at your threshold. That could take you down to below 6.5. That's front group to middling, which is what we saw actually in Monte Grappa. So that makes a lot of sense now that you mentioned that. But let's count the leaders here. So we have Tom Pidcock. This is Ineos for the Tour. Tom Pidcock.
Yeah.
We have Geraint Thomas. We have Carlos Rodriguez. We have Egan Bernal. So we have
I don't see Thomas as leader at the Tour.
Do you think he sees himself as a leader at the Tour?
I actually don't think Thomas sees himself as a leader at the Tour.
Oh, come on.
No, I truly believe that. I think I have the same expectations as the Vuelta last year, where I vividly remember him saying on the podcast on What's Occurring that the Giro would be the last Grand Tour where he fully focuses on GC, or that he fully trains as a GC rider for. I might be misquoting here, but that's what I remember at least. The quote
was, God, okay, I could be wrong.
Go ahead.
I think he said, right now, if you asked me, I would say this is the last time I'll ride for GC, but I might say something different next week, I think is what he said.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he said he was retiring as well. So I think he said a couple of things that have turned out to maybe be a little different than reality. I think as long as he's showing up at a race, he's there to win. And I think he's going to be perpetually disappointed because Ineos has, very much a let the road decide type of situation. And Spencer, to go back to, I want you to remain calm when I make this statement, Spencer. But I do think that Pidcock, obviously extremely hardworking. The guy definitely grinds. He's worked very hard to be where he is. He's also incredibly, incredibly, incredibly gifted. He also strikes me as quite a smart person, maybe a bit too smart to be a Tour de France winner. Honestly, I think the guy's thinking a lot when he's out there on the bike. And I get the feeling from Unchained and just bits and pieces I picked up in other content when he's asked, hey, what's your favorite discipline of riding? He loves mountain biking, right? Yeah. That's what he loves the most. And the reality is you're not going to go out and win the UCI World Cup or World Championship and make 5 million euros a year. Just no way. It's not going to happen. You want to make that kind of money, you're going to go chase Grand Tours. You're going to be a Classics winner. You're going to be everything that Pidcock is right now. And I do think that when he's saying the right things that he needs to say to get to the support from Ineos to put himself in position to win stages. Now, Spencer, what I wanted you to hold on for, there's a bit of an air of Taylor Phinney to me about Tom Pidcock because he's so gifted and could do so many different things. And I don't think he wants to be at the Tour other than to snag a couple stages. And then he's kind of got to be there the rest of the time. I don't think it's easy for him.
So disrespectful to Tom Pidcock. He's so much better than Taylor Phinney. But no,
I don't think he's going to leave and go start oil painting tomorrow. But I don't think that how he would prefer to spend his time is riding a 3-week Grand Tour.
Yeah, I could see that.
And I agree with also the focus thing on one end. Yes, Spencer. If you see Pidcock's divergence of focuses throughout the season, he's focusing on multiple different things, and that might limit himself in a certain discipline. But on the other hand, sport is not just physical. We talk about data all the time, or the data of riders, but reality is there's a person behind that rider, and that person might also just find happiness in doing those different disciplines, which that might actively boost them to be more motivated in the hunt for photos victories and boost them to be a better rider as a consequence. So I think we should never underrate the mental aspect of the sport as well, because it's data matters, what's matter, but there's always a little bit of panache that's needed when it comes to riders, and I think the mood of riders helps.
Do you guys think? I mean, I know they've addressed this week, but is it weird that Tom Pidcock and Wout van Aert get paid by Red Bull, and then Bora is going to be called the Red Bull team at the Tour? Like, how is that not? And I know they like rolled out some like, well, that's not. This is beyond the Peloton. This is beyond the Peloton US. That's beyond the Peloton Belgium. We're not related to them at all. Like, come on, guys. But how does that work, Benji? Is this like really going to happen?
Is that different from multiple teams riding on Specialized than a certain rider on a different team?
Well, that Specialized doesn't own the team,
Specialized
though, I
deal.
guess would be that's where I would say it gets weird, because Red Bull now owns the team. It'd be like Trek.
You can't drink an SL8 either.
Because Trek doesn't sponsor any other teams, right? Men's teams. Because they own Little Trek.
There is that. Does Balwaza Trek still exist? The Conti team? It's not that super relevant, but I don't actually know if there's many more teams riding on a Trek in the world.
Which I assume is because they can't. I don't think they could be a sponsor of, because the UCI rules say you can't sponsor a team if you own another team. But you know, they're worded so wonderfully ambiguous that you could just kind of wiggle around it if you need to, like in the case of Red Bull. But I don't know, just something to like keep an eye on. I think it's going to be so weird.
I think it's a non-issue.
But
I just don't care.
Like, what if Tadej's personal sponsor was like, Ineos, that's my plastic sponsor? You'd be like, what? Why do you have an Ineos helmet sponsor on? Yeah, it's my personal ruin.
That'd be like the
sponsor.
That'd be like the collection of sports washing. I write for UAE, my personal sponsor is Ineos. Sorry, but there's a limit here, guys.
And I mean, I don't know the rules maybe as well as I should, but you know, like Jim Ratcliffe bought Manchester United, or at least part of it, but he owns other teams that could compete in the Champions League with Manchester United. I don't fully understand how that's allowed. That seems strange to me, but but I guess so maybe we're now you have me like second guessing my Matteo Jorgensen thing. I don't know. Just with these Americans on Visma, the thing I worry about is I worry about Matteo in the super high mountains, just because he's carrying more weight because he's taller against guys like Primoz, Tadej, like even a wounded Jonas, Remco, if he's doing well. That just seems like such a disadvantage. The thing I worry about Sepp is, and I know he just won a Grand Tour 2 Grand Tours ago, but in the Tour, everything kind of turns into a time trial. Have you noticed this? Like, even if there's not a lot of time trials, the climbs are kind of time trials. Like, I just kind of wonder if that type of rider who can't put out the massive watts is at a disadvantage at the Tour de France, because it's raced at such a hard, steady pace and the climbs aren't quite as steep as you'd expect at the other 2 Grand Tours.
Ooh.
Like, what's the last tiny rider that won the Tour that's not a good time trialist?
Well, I think being a good time trialist matters, and we've seen that the Grand Tour winners of the Tour de France mostly are riders that are very capable of doing that. Let's be honest about it. Hindley, when he won the Tour de France, when he won the Giro, like he wasn't the most prominent tier, but he actually got better when it comes to his time trial as well. But it's just because time trial is that important as well. I'm not. On one end, you've got the fact, okay, if I can produce X amount of watts on a climb, I'm probably going to be able to produce relatively a solid amount of watts on the flat. Then CDA comes in and so forth, of course. So that's a major factor there. And I just think like a rider like Lenny Martinez, I think that's a disadvantage for a Grand Tour. Like, he's on a, 6 million contract for 3 years, I think is the rumor when it comes to Bahrain, which $2 million a year is a lot of money. That I personally wasn't expecting to be spent on Lenny Martinez in this transfer season. His TT is shockingly decent for a guy that is that small when it comes to height. And on the other end, he's a really good climber. I don't know. I don't know if that's the focus, as in you need to be a TTer when it comes to time trial to be able to like perform with the best on the climbs, because it's written as a time trial. I think it's more as in what can you perform after high energy expenditure or something. That's maybe something that I think values a lot. I think that's also what differentiates sprinters at World Tour versus sprinters at Conti and Pro Team level. Like, there are Conti sprinters with proper peak watts, for example. There are Pro Team sprinters with proper peak watts, but then you look at what can they survive during the stage to get to that, and the World Tour sprinters, most of them at least, are the ones that get through the hard stages, the hard flat stages too. Philipsen's relatively versatile now, for example. Milan's a very versatile rider as well. Merlier's not as versatile as the other two, but he just finished a Grand Tour and won for the first time 2 sprint stages that aren't before stage 3. So it's more that area that I'm looking at. But also, if you then take a look at the Tour de France, in the last 2 years, Visma's spoken a lot about the fact that they have made stages harder, mountain stages harder, by pacing the climbs to put the kilojoules, the energy expenditure into Pogačar. And then we look at the Tour de France this time. There's lots of mountains to high pace on, but on the other hand, will they have the confidence in Vingegaard's base level to not backfire towards Vingegaard with that strategy? It's a lot more interesting.
Yeah. No, that is an interesting conundrum.
Pogačar has a new trainer, Javier Sola, which I tend to have I've got this feeling there's not much data for it yet, because on the mountain stage in the Giro, yes, the Livigno stage was, I think there were 5,000 kilojoules, I think Roy Oliveira told me, of UAE before the proper final climbs happened. That's a lot of energy expenditure before that climb. But on the other hand, Pogačar's never really put under super pressure by competitors in the Giro, while in the Tour de France in the past, he was put under pressure the entire time. So to me, it hasn't been proven yet whether Pogačar might still have some vulnerability in high energy expenditure stuff, but I think his trainer switch might have been an opportunity to work on that area, because the way they've been talking, his training has changed. Like,
yeah,
I don't remember the specifics, but it's very different from the San Milan training of the past. So I think we're seeing a different than the best Pogačar yet at the moment.
I mean, it definitely, whatever they did, I listened to like an hour-long paywalled interview with this trainer who talked about in detail what they changed. Pretty interesting stuff. Okay. It's on the site. It's like a Kilometer Zero on the cycling podcast feed.
Okay.
You have to be a member to listen to it. It's called
that's worth it.
Sierra Alpha. Super interesting episode. But it seems to be working, from what we saw at the Giro. I guess the question I would ask, with Jonas, let's say, hobbled, who's pressuring him at the Tour? That's the one thing I keep coming back to, is like, who could even put him under pressure in the form he had at the Giro? I kind of think it's only Visma at full strength with the full strength Jonas. That's where it gets tricky.
Or a crash.
Well, yeah, a crash.
Yeah.
He doesn't crash that often, though. And as I say that, I'm thinking of all the crashes he's had.
And in addition to that, I do think that, first of all, they're showing up with loads of climbers in the team of Pogačar. UAE showing up with Ayuso, Almeida, etc. So the list goes on. Yates, don't forget Adam Yates. And they're showing up with two rulers, which Tim Wellens and Polit, who I think is still a great signing. I'm looking forward to see whether he can fill in that problematic breakaway formation phase they had in the past, where they just couldn't control anything in the breakaway formation at the Tour de France. Signing Polit was great for the classics. He performed there, but I think it will also matter for the Tour de France. Wellens, he's had a sun allergy thing or summer allergy thing, I don't know what it's called, in the past. It's probably going to be sunny at the Tour de France. I don't know if he's over that or not. I don't know how that works. I don't have sun allergy or something. So I'm curious if that's going to have an effect on him. But then I look at the climbers and they're supportive there. But something you might have noticed it as well, during the Giro sprint stages, Ineos is glorious at keeping Thomas in a safe position on a bubble on one side of the road, sprinting the team a bit forward towards the corners, making sure they're safe. Pogačar is always alone, 80% of the time at least. He's always alone, fighting for positions. He keeps a bubble around him of space where possible, because let's be honest, it's a washing machine effect, so it's not always possible. But I generally think that's the space where he's most vulnerable when it comes to crashes right now. In Copenhagen, Denmark, I vividly remember the crash that happened on the left side of the road, maybe just behind the bridge, where he was behind that crash. And if he was one rider more to the front, he would have crashed and his hand would have been in between riders and the barrier, and he might have gotten injured there. So I think that's one area where I'm scared when it comes to Pogačar crashing. But obviously, I've got that same feeling when it comes to Roglic, because he's crashed that way before. He crashed out of the 2021 Tour de France. People say, okay, Colbrelli pushed him. I'm still not fully sold on that theory. I'm more looking at the theory of Roglic tried to move up on the left side without Wout van Aert, who was sitting on the other side of the road in a sprint lineup stage. And that resulted in him getting bumped into and crashing, which that's the same kind of scenario. Those are the dangerous moments for GC riders. And Remco felt like that in the Giro last year, right? Was that where the track train stormed past or something? He went to the right looking behind him or something. And
Yes. Yeah, I do remember this. Yeah, and he went down, right?
Yes, he went down.
Yeah.
He went down.
Yeah, it was like this soapy,
by a dog
rainy...
somewhere, right?
What was that?
Was the Giro or the Vuelta where he got crashed by a dog?
Sounds like something that would happen at the Giro.
I think he's had multiple dog crashes. I'm also thinking right now, Spencer, of the GIF that you sent me of Pogačar getting hip bumped.
GIF. I'm stopping.
It's
GIF.
No, it's GIF. The guy who invented it calls it a GIF. So, but yeah, Pogačar got hip checked by the rider
too.
Yeah,
no need to be up there. Yeah, and he gets hit pretty hard.
Like very hard. I mean, he moved laterally probably 4 feet in the middle of like the full-on sprint that was going down. Yeah. And I mean, he stayed upright, which is a testament to his bike handling and his ability. And it could happen at any moment. I think part of what I'm hearing though, guys, is you have zero confidence that Roglic can animate this race or put pressure on Pogačar. Like no one has mentioned him. What do you think?
Well, putting pressure on Pogačar, Roglic has never really been. I think there's one occasion where I think of Roglic doing an all-out early attack, which that was the Roglic had the attack in the Vuelta on, maybe it was Covadonga, I'm not sure about it. Where he went with Bernal. In the rain.
Wild boy that day. Just absolutely crushed everybody.
Panache Roglic. Then he had his Then he had his no pain, no glory attack and crash in that random hill stage where he decided to go on the last hill. But let's say 90% of Roglic gaining time in Grand Tours is because of a last kilometer burst, which Pogačar is now pretty good at. And I'd argue that
he's not bad at it. He's kind
of he's pretty all right. And last year in Emilia, for example, Roglic was better doing that, but in a Grand Tour, I'm actually not 100% sure which. I'd lean more towards Pogačar, and especially because like Roglic left Jumbo-Visma, joined Bora, and since then I haven't seen the old Roglic yet. As in, there are stages, even in the Dauphiné, for example. I'm going to open up the profile and keep talking in the meanwhile while I'm opening that profile.
My one rebuttal as his counsel here.
Yeah.
Time trial, I think we've forgotten. Opening time trial of Basque Country, he goes the wrong way, turns around, and still crushes everybody.
And still wins. Yeah.
That would be the one glimmer of Visma Roglic.
Agree.
I'd say.
Yep. That's a very fair point. The time trial is definitely something where he's proven himself this year. But then on the stages where you'd say, oh, that's a Roglic finish.
Yeah,
The mountain with the last 3-4 kilometers are maybe not that steep. Those are the ones where you'd be like, okay, that's where on paper he'd be up there. And photo stage, I'm looking at, for example, stage 2 of the Dauphiné. It's basically an undulating parcours is how I'd classify the first 80% of the stage. And then the last 30 are uphill with a little bit of a staircase. So up, flat, up. But I don't know, man. It's like 10.9 kilometers, 3.6%. It's a bit fake news climbish, as in there's steep gradients, but there's also flatter kilometers in there. It depends on where people go, but if Bora can control the group, then that would be the kind of stage where Jumbo-Visma would try to keep it together in the past for Roglic to win the group sprint. That makes sense?
Yes. I mean, you can picture it in your mind's eye, right? Perfectly. This is how he's made his career. But guys, I almost think, and I love Primož Roglic, might be my favorite rider.
Yeah.
I think Tadej is better at everything than Primož. I think that's the fundamental problem. Tadej is a better climber. Tadej is a better time trialist. Tadej is a better sprinter. Tadej is a better descender. Tadej is better in the pack. It starts to get hard to think, where is he going to take time? And Benji, do you remember stage 18 of the 2020 Tour? The only time I actually can really remember Roglic having Tadej on the ropes. Tadej was hurting that day and didn't do anything. He said, I'll just ride this in and we'll go to the time trial. Big mistake in retrospect. That's the only time I can, and that was 4 years ago. Roglic is 4 years older than that. Tadej's better than he was then. I just think it starts to get hard to even imagine it. The case would be, if I was hired to make a case for this, it would be that he's had the perfect run up. Even the Basque Country crash didn't affect him that much. This is just theoretical. Didn't affect him that much. He's had the perfect run up. All the pressures on Pogačar. The Giro wiped him out, and Roglic will take advantage of that. That would be the only way I could see him winning.
Well, but when you look at their teams as well, I don't feel like Bora stacks up very well man to man compared to UAE. Even think about Jai Hindley's performances in 2023 relative to prior years.
But he did put UAE in the vice that one day. What was that, stage 7? Put him in the mental pretzel.
I think he was actually good at the Tour de France, and I generally believe that he would have top 5 if it wasn't for his crash. Maybe just under top 5, but I think you're being harsh on my boy Jay, my friend. Come on.
We should also remember how much harder the Tour is. And I mean, not maybe raced harder, but it is probably raced harder, but how much harder it is to finish top 5 at the Tour versus even podium another Grand Tour, because the depth is just so much stronger. So let's just say Jai finishes 5th. That's a good result. So
yeah, but also you're Pogačar. So we're role playing. You are Tadej Pogačar. I am Vingegaard, which is a weird comparison to look at, but I show up at the race with, on paper, under prepped. You show up at the race with the Giro in your legs. You know that I'm under prepped. On one end, you can choose to go hard in the first week, whatever, but it's a relatively backloaded Tour de France. You might try to take advantage early from the fact that I'm under prepped, but on the other end, you might look at the race and say, okay, because it's backloaded, I need to save my energy for the latter part of the Grand Tour, but the risk is that I might grow in the race. What's your choice?
Well, I mean, if I'm Tadej, there's one speed. I'm coming out with a hammer. I'm looking at they do go over the Galibier on stage 4, but it's not the hard side. That's always funny. That's the Galibier. It's not the hard side. But it's like, well, it would be pretty hard if we went out and did it right now.
Yeah.
We would say something else. And then I'm looking at that time trial on stage 7. That to me would be, if I'm Tadej, I'm thinking I destroy him, because that's time trialing is the last thing that comes in, that clicks into focus when you're building form, and it's the first thing that clicks out. Think of like Armstrong, great Tour de France time trialist, get to the Olympics, and he's just like, once you like outside that little window, you're just I don't believe he ever won. I should look that up. I don't believe he ever won an Olympic time trial, which was always confusing to me as a kid, because it's like, wait, how is he so good at the Tour? And then a week and a half later, he's not winning the Olympic time trial. But that would be, to me, the last thing that Jonas is going to have is the time trialing. So that would be a potential weak spot. as you say, maybe he's fine for that stage 21 time trial, but that stage 7 one
It's also
is the
how
big
do the
problem.
injuries that he had impact the position that he can take on the bike? Because, for example, with Remco, a shoulder blade fracture, what does that do when it comes to your ability to a few months later have to go a full effort in the TT bars during a time trial? That puts that, like, your shoulder blade ain't gonna be too happy with you forcing it during training in a position for a TT. Then I look at the injuries that Vingegaard had: fractured collarbone, ribs, pneumothorax,
Yeah.
and pulmonary contusion. I think it was like bruised lungs. Is that? I don't even know what that means,
Bruised,
but
punctured, not good. Whatever it is.
it's not good. But it's also those are a lot of bones and fractures in the area that you want to have as dense as possible on a TT bike. So I wonder how much that's going to impact all these riders in the time trial. Like in the same way that Pogačar's wrist last year probably was not ideal for time trial either, because you got to hold your TT bars with your hand, which is attached to your wrist. So
yeah, this was like a theory out in the ether about Roglic for a long time. Like, remember the Giro where it's like, oh, he's struggling because he can't get in position, and then the final time trial rolls around and we're like, oh no, wait, he was just waiting this entire time. He knew, he understood
was that a
the
theory?
assignment.
Maybe early on. I had more the theory, and I still believe that theory, that Roglic in the earlier months of last year, he struggled with high energy expenditure stages, and you see that in Tirreno already. Yes, he ends up winning that race, but he wins that in the way we it's not really eco mode, because Pogačar chose for eco mode, but with Roglic in Tirreno last year, the mountain stage he won, for example, it was reduced. There was loads of headwind, and he had to come back with other riders, which might be a slight choice, but it's also because you know realistically that, okay, maybe if I try following it will backfire. I think he was kind of under prepped in that way going into the likes of the Giro, and then the one stage where he has struggles as well. We're looking at Monte Bondone, for example, which that was a brutal stage when it comes to the amount of energy expenditure during the stage. Loads of kilojoules were spent that day. So I genuinely think it's hard. It's difficult to say in hindsight, but during the race, I saw that as a potential vulnerability for Roglic. And in hindsight, I think Ineos then slow-paced a few stages in the third week of the Giro last year, which I think backfires with the time trial then. I don't think I'm not sure it would have changed anything, but I would have liked to see a scenario, just for the sakes of figuring out if it's real, that same Giro, but Ineos hard pacing the Trecime stage, for example, because that was a very slow stage.
But didn't Thomas lose time on that? So then if they hard pace, do they just lose more time?
It's wait, let me check. So when it comes to last year,
Primoz crashed right too at the Giro. So
yeah, he crashed, but Thomas did not lose time on the Monte Bondone stage.
What about
he lost time on the time trial?
What about stage 19?
Let's see.
I remember him getting distance and then arguing with someone about if
if
he would just sat up because he knew that he didn't need the time, or if
he was on tired. 3 seconds. I don't know. I can't tell you.
Is I'd that have to 3 check seconds more if they hard pace? I guess would be the concern.
I actually don't think so, because it's for example, if you take a look at Jouplan last year in the Tour de France, yes, that stage in Jouplan, I think Pogačar attacks first on the Jouplan climb, and then Vingegaard gradually crawls back to the wheel, if I recall. And that was up to that point, we saw Pogačar having the advantage outside of Marie Blanc with his explosivity, and then Vingegaard kind of tried following, but that bottled him on Col-Thérèse. And then if you look at Jouplan, that was kind of the switching point where Visma hard-paced the stage. Their hope is obviously that benefits Vingegaard, but I'm of the opinion that them hard-pacing that stage might be the reason that Vingegaard was even competitive that day compared to the explosivity of Pogačar on that climb, which that's the length of climb that fits Pogačar. which
Yeah. I mean,
this
also,
podcast is theory
Yeah.
Friday.
I guess too, yeah, it gets more complex too, because let's say Ineos doesn't hard pace stage 19 of last year's Giro. Does that then introduce doubt into your GC leader's head of like, they don't believe in me, they didn't hard pace, we're just going to the time trial? Like, is there a mental component that it's like, you guys went back and forth on this with the sprinters, right? At the Giro of like, if you don't hard pace, does the sprinter stop believing in themselves? And I tend to think it probably does play a big part.
So, for example, when it comes to Thomas in the third week, they didn't hard pace the Trecime stage. What is it? Stage 19? Trecime stage?
Yeah, stage 19.
They didn't hard pace there, based on my theory, which I tend to believe in. But hey, it's your choice if you do. That would make it, if Ineos paces harder there, that would be better for Thomas and worse for Roglic towards the end of that stage, even because that's what we can perceive from Bondoni and multiple other stages. I think in Catalonia last year, was it the La Molina stage where the hardest stage in terms of pacing, etc. Quick-Step paced a bit earlier, trying to make it harder on the climb before, and that is the one where Remco takes time. The ones that are Unipuerto, like Laporte, is the one where Roglic still has everything on the final climb. So there's a pattern there. Obviously, a pattern exists until it doesn't. But I'm of that opinion. What was your question again?
Well, now that you say this, I kind of wonder if we're overthinking all of this, because we assume that Ineos could have hard paced. But do you remember this weird dynamic at the Giro last year where they had like 4 guys in the top 10 and they all seemed to be racing for their own top 10? Like, I kind of wonder sometimes behind the scenes if it's not as monolithic as we perceive from the outside.
I think the Plus and Arensman would have folded and were folding in domestic role where necessary in that Giro. I vividly remember for example, the Trecime stage, when they did push through on the final hard segment. That was the final hard segment where then they were pushing through, and maybe they go 85 to 90%, not 100%, but they're still working for Thomas there, in my opinion. Now, we're saying all this about the Giro of last year. This doesn't have any effect this year, because like Roglic didn't have his surgery in last minute. He had it 2 years ago. So I think we're deep diving too much in previous year.
We just were talking about if Jonas easing into the Tour. The first stage at the Tour de France has 7 motorized climbs.
Yeah, generally not easing into the Tour.
So you might see gaps right there. I'm actually now I'm pretty excited for this Tour. Holy smokes, this is an absurd.
It's an interesting route, and especially just the start is very, very vibrant. Then we've seen a few good Grand Departs and Grande Partenzas recently, and I think this one's looking interesting also because it's kind of the Tour de France kind of start where Firenze to Rimini, that first stage, Pogačar can open that up if he wants.
Just like he did at the Giro. I mean, this is actually messing with my head because they're starting the Tour in Italy. Yeah, and we just watched the Giro d'Italia with Tadej Pogačar. It's very confusing.
Story time. My wife is British. I met my wife in Hungary at the Tour of Italy. Whenever I tell that to a person that is not in cycling, they are shocked, as in like, why is the Tour of Italy in Hungary? Like, it's a whole discussion point. Sorry, I think
we're the crazy ones. We become desensitized to things that make no sense. Of course. So too. Of course, they've got to do it. They have to. Like, why? This is crazy. But this actually is a really good opening route. Andrew's got to go. He's got to get back to the corporate HQ. Before we go, who's your pick for the Tour, Benji?
Pogačar.
Andrew?
I'm going to throw out, I like to throw out some unexpected things that are going to happen. Here's what I've got for you guys. I don't know how it's going to happen. I feel like Carapaz, after not making the Olympic team, I feel like he was banking on getting that Olympic gold medal because it's really all he's done in the last couple of years, and he needed to do it again. Somehow he's going to find a way to win a stage because I think it's a life and death situation for him. And again, I'm not quite sure how he's going to get in a break with the right composition. But I feel like this is a
Losing time.
beyond the Peloton favorite. Jonas Abramson, I feel like, is due for a stage win. Like, I think we're going to see him finally come good in this tour.
I swear, Abrahamson, he was in the break together with Asgreen last year, right?
He was the
with
reason
He's always in a break.
They made it. I mean, that guy.
Yeah, he's an absolute truck, that man.
I think he is like, I shouldn't even say the name. It's not PC anymore. He is like the Magellan of riders. Like, I think you're going to see more guys be like, wait, why am I losing all this weight? I'm just going to get massive and like just be putting out huge watts, because who can, as we saw at the Giro, it's such a limited number of people that can compete on these mountain stages. Like, why are you even chasing that? Like, go for everything else that isn't a mountain stage. Get those watts up there. Get big, boys and girls who want to big bike races. That's my unsolicited advice. The Carapaz thing is weird. Like, he's clearly put his whole season around the Tour and the Olympics, and then it feels like they're grading him halfway through a test. Like, what if he wins the Tour? And it's like, sorry, bud, you're not going to the Olympics. Like, I don't understand why they didn't wait to do the selection. It's very, very weird. As you guys said, though, Benji, the Paris circuit probably helps. It's probably better for Navarez anyway. I just think it's odd how they've done this.
I agree. Like, the way I perceived it is that Carapaz, when he won the Olympic gold 3 years ago, which is odd to say because I think they postponed it because of COVID. When he won that, I think he said that the Ecuadorian, I'm just quoting what I have in my head, so let's hope it's correct, that he was quoted saying, okay, the Ecuadorian Federation didn't actually help me very much. I had to do a lot of this for myself, which is probably true. Like, he wouldn't make that up if it wasn't true.
Yeah.
And I think the Ecuadorian Federation didn't like that very much. And there is definitely bias from the Ecuadorian Federation towards Carapaz, because they literally had like a quote of the president saying, oh, Narvaez is the best Ecuadorian cyclist or the Ecuadorian one-day racer we had or something in Ecuador ever, which your other guy won Olympic gold 3 years ago. I'm not sure that really fits. So there is definitely bias against Carapaz from the Federation, but from a sportive perspective, they did do the wrong thing, the Federation, in saying, I think in March or something, they said, okay, we're going to retroactively say that the points matter from January this year, which benefits Narvaez, of course, because he did Santos to an under, scored a lot of points there. But on the other hand, from my view, looking at them as riders, parkour fits Narvaez better. The end.
I agree. I think they just should have waited. I mean, I guess it gets complicated if Carapaz wins the Tour. It's like, sorry, bud, you're not going. We're going with Narvaez. The whole thing is a mess. It's kind of fun, though, that they've shrunk the race. I think it makes it more interesting, more open. Makes it maybe a little bit more of like an honor to even be there. My pick for the Tour, boring, Tadej Pogačar. But someone has to believe in this take. Wout van Aert finishes on the podium. And I know this makes no sense. He looked so skinny at Norway, and his sprint is so bad. It's so bad right now. And the only way I can square that is that he's going for GC.
So I'm going to throw my GC take out right now. I think Wout is going to win. And to your point regarding weight, we saw Wout, I believe, at his leanest ever this spring prior to the crash. I mean, he looked probably 3 kilos lighter than he did at the same time last year. In fact, at like peak leanness, 2023 Tour de France Wout, I think one of the second or third order consequences of this crash and his recovery, I think he's likely lost even more weight. So I think we're going to see the leanest Wout ever. And Benji, to your point about how's he going to do in the high mountains? Well, we're going to find out when he weighs 12 pounds less than he did a year ago.
Firstly, I want to make clear that losing weight as a cyclist doesn't automatically make sure you ride faster up a mountain. There is a balance to it. You can't just keep losing weight because that ends up having eating disorders. There's a lot of cyclists that are struggling with eating disorders, whether it's pro cyclists, amateur cyclists. And I think him just being lean might not necessarily be a positive. So there is a point. There is a point at which getting too lean is possible that it affects you negatively. So that's one thing. The other thing is, we've said so much nonsense today about all theories of the Tour de France. This rider's going to go there. This rider's going to go there. Let's just also like appreciate that, first of all, the riders are all seemingly going to show up, which with all the injuries we've had, that's a big win. Hopefully Vingegaard's there as well. Hopefully Wout's there as well. Hopefully everybody that was injured can go to the Tour de France that wants to be at the Tour de France, that we want to see at the Tour de France. And I think we're going to have a really good race then, because despite the question marks for everybody, even if there's one better than the others, how long has it been that they are all at the same race?
Yeah, well, what if Patrick pulls Remco? He's not ready. He's not ready yet.
It's possible. I just like, Benji, to respond to your first point, I completely agree with you. There is a lot of disordered eating and cycling. We've heard about it for years. It's extremely negative. And anybody who's listening, getting lighter is not always the path to getting faster. I will caveat that though with, I don't believe Wout has an eating disorder. I feel like he's had an I'm too jacked disorder. I think he's just like naturally a super muscular dude, particularly in the upper body. Yeah. And I think that if he's losing weight, it's not going to be from, I think that's where he would probably drop it. He's naturally like an extremely muscular guy in the upper body. Mathieu van der Poel, very similar. And ironically, if you look at Van der Poel's physique this year, because he's reported that he's actually seriously lifting weights for the first time ever, and like we've seen the impact of that. Ironically, I actually think it's transformed his body a bit, and to me, his upper body does look a bit smaller than it has in years past. He no longer has like an incredible Hulk style look on the bike.
Benji, I tend to agree with you that losing weight is a trap. As someone who got really, really skinny to go fast and then had like their worst racing season ever, I can attest to that. It's not like a silver bullet.
Are you sure it was related to the weight loss?
Oh, I was flying on those climbs. I don't know what happened, but no, I mean, Andrew and I know someone who like basically starved themselves and were like, I'm getting faster. This is amazing. It's like, yeah, it works for a little bit and then it doesn't work. Because your body falls apart. But I don't know. I mean, it could. Wout is so good that, like, if you just think about it in a Moneyball sense, like, who's going to do well? Let's just pick like the most talented rider with the highest FTP, and who could maybe lose a little bit of weight. That would be the argument. I am looking at these final 3 days are ridiculous, including the time trial. And it is an interesting thing to note. This tour is 5% longer than a normal Tour de France, because they've added a stage essentially. If you think about the final day is not counting normally.
Wow.
They've increased the length of the tour essentially, which I'm curious to see, because a lot of times, like if imagine Froome kind of fading at the end and then gets bailed out by that 21st stage, not really, but we would all say that. But
hypothetically.
Yeah, you have to race it through the 21st stage now, which I'm curious to see if that changes anything.
Yeah, and like when it comes to the 21st stage, I don't know. Turini is a long climb. 20.6 kilometers is the unofficial version, because there's like a false flat towards the big climb of it. This is a second climb in stage 21, stage 20, by the way. And then you've got Col Mian, 7.6 kilometers, 6.8%. And then finally Col la Couillole, which is 15.8 kilometers at 7.3%. These are actually pretty, that kind of reminds me of maybe Otakam kind of vibes when it comes to the stage we had in 2022. While then if I look at stage 19, that's the one where I'm like, that's Granon style. But I also have a feeling, because of all the question marks we have, who knows, maybe there's already someone far ahead at that point. But let's hope that's not the case. Let's hope we've got a battle until the end in this Grand Tour. Let's hope everybody stays fit throughout the start of this Grand Tour. And I think we'll be looking at an enjoyable race, regardless of the winner. Because, like, reality is I want entertaining cycling. And sometimes that comes with unpredictability. Sometimes observing greatness can be enjoyable, even though I've got a limit to that personally. But I think we can't complain with the times we live in cycling wise.
Andrew put forth a question last year, the year before. It's been with me ever since. Have we ever seen a close three-way race for the Tour? I actually have a hard time thinking back on that. I mean, it would be, we probably won't see it this year, just going on odds, but kind of an interesting thing to imagine. That if it is close between multiple riders in the final few days, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I think maybe the 1 year where it was relatively close between the riders was 2019, pre-COVID. Because if I recall, Alaphilippe was in yellow. The mountain stages got scrapped. The landslides were happening left and right. Bernal ends up winning with a bit of a 1-2 from Thomas. Then Bernal. Would anything have changed if the stages weren't changed? But I think that was the closer one in recent years. I'm going through the years and I'm thinking, okay, the Thomas 2018 was one. Sorry, but the second that Grand Tour started, it was pretty clear that Thomas was going to win that Grand Tour. Then you have the Froome years where Froome was dominant throughout those years, to be honest. Then Nibali, like fanatic Nibali fan. I'm ruining Andrew's day by lengthening this podcast by like 75%. But
we need to give Benji an hour to talk about Nibali. Sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm
the
sorry.
The year was 2016. The stage was stage 17 of the Giro d'Italia.
It was 2014, my friend. I don't want to hear it. 2014, Froome crashed out, Quintana crashed out, Contador crashed out. That's all details.
I kind of like that
reality
tour,
is,
actually.
In the cobblestone stage, which is still one of my most rated stages of all time when it comes to the stage I've seen when it comes to cycling, together with Grano, that's one I always remember. And maybe the Montalcino stage that Evans won against Vinokurov was also one that's high up in my mind. This Quabble stage was really cool. That's also like 7 minutes is what he won with. And maybe the Wiggins versus, I don't know, like even the 2010 Tour de France between Contador and Schleck, that was relatively close, but it's a two-man fight again. 2011, the Schlecks versus Evans. Was that a battle? I was an Evans fan back then. Sorry, I've switched from Evans to Nibali and then to, I guess, Aramburu, and now I'm lost. I've got no favorite riders anymore, which is kind of devastating. But I can't remember in the last 14 years at least one that was super close between three riders.
It might be 2019 would be the closest we get. I actually forgot.
2008?
2008, yeah, because it was Sastre, the Schlecks, Evans. That might be the one, actually.
2007 was also 3 riders within 31 seconds. Yeah, Leipheimer got popped afterwards, but let's be honest, a lot of riders before that.
Well, 2007 was a weird year. I mean, this is actually a pet peeve of mine that they change. They change the official records due to doping, but it's like, no, I just put an asterisk. I just need to know what the race was like as it happened.
Just put an asterisk next to the race.
Yeah, because I hate when they mess with the results.
You won't make me believe that there's only 2 riders in that Grand Tour that were not that were doping. Sorry, but
dude, I had forgotten.
That's just my opinion.
Leipheimer was 31 seconds back in the 2007 Tour. Holy smokes!
Yeah,
we used to be a proper country, Andrew.
used to be a country.
Maybe again.
And now you've got
again this year. Wow.
Yeah, now you've got Kus Jorgensen as the duo together with under-prepped Vingegaard.
Yeah, Jorgensen is serially underrated.
Yeah.
I did not see Paris-Nice coming. And then he wins Dwars-Vlaanderen, which is a World Tour one-day race. So, yeah, you could say he's had a pretty good spring. It is interesting. Yeah. Before we go, remember when he signed with them and it was like on Twitter, and this is why Twitter, Benji, if you left Twitter, the site might crash in the cycling sense because there's no logic or anything on there anymore, but it's just like, oh, what a mistake. He's going to be buried as a domestique. And then a year later, it's like, hey, Matteo, can you lead us at every race? Because we have no one else left. We need you to
but
win stage races and one-day races.
I think that was always kind of a non-true story. Like he's gonna be a full-on domestique. We've seen Laporte grow in the background of Wout and benefit from those situations, winning races like Hendwevelgem, yes, but also the likes of Dwars-Vlaanderen on his own, for example. So riders that have gone to Jumbo-Visma as domestiques have continuously, if they have the quality, been able to benefit from situations, because in classics, reality is that the majority of classics are won by numerical advantage or individual strength by a single rider. Either there's one rider that is I don't know the English expression, head and shoulders above the rest. Maybe that's an English expression. And on the other side, you've got situations where team-based strategies, numerical advantage, gets a certain rider a victory, which is how Jumbo-Visma has won a lot of races recently in classics. This year, not so much, but in the past. Tratnik, for example, the fact that they have another rider to attack with in the final that wasn't in the initial split that day, that is, you're represented everywhere if you've got loads of great riders like that. So in classics, you can benefit from that. Jorgensen Paris-Nice, I believe in podium because the parkour seemingly fit that. His TT is good. He's strong enough when it comes to climbing. Did I expect him to win Paris? No, because I expected Remco to win. I still, unlike you, I don't know how you said it earlier, I believe that Remco lost Paris tactically, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Jorgensen was the only one super strong enough to benefit from it and win the race eventually. And the difference wasn't huge. It was marginal in my opinion. So I think Jorgensen is still underrated. I have no clue how Kuz is going to do at the Tour de France, but Kuz always shows up at a good level, and I think he broke a KOM in Andorra the other week on Béchalis, which training rides don't always translate to racing watts, but we've seen Kuz ride pretty fast up a mountain before, so I think we're going to see that.
Lock it in. He's got the KOM. He's going to win the Tour. I mean, yeah, it is a funny thing where Matteo told me after Paris-Nice, he doesn't win that race if he doesn't go to Visma. So it's like a paradox. You go to the more stacked team and you actually get more opportunities. The irony of this entire thing is if Primož Roglič would have stayed with Visma, it'd be the leader at the Tour de France on his old team. Like, just trust that no one's ever going to be healthy.
I never thought of it like that. That's actually quite funny.
Just trust no one will ever be healthy.
But that maybe he also has a Giro in the legs then.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Benji. We'll let Andrew get out of here. And keep crunching the breakaway formation. I'm convinced you're the only person in the world who watches the first hour of races.
Sorry, but it is criminally underrated. The first hour of a mountain stage is 90% of the time the best part of a mountain stage, in my opinion.
I've actually started watching them because you mentioned them so much on the show. And it is, yeah, you can oftentimes have more fun watching that and turn it off. Go on your day.
Because you just see the motives of every team. Okay, UAE, are they going to control this mountain stage? Do they seem like they're willing to go for the stage? Yes, they're trying to get a small breakaway up the road. How are they trying to control the stage? Okay, there's a 4-man group up the road. They're responding to every counterattack or to every large group to make sure it's not an uncontrollable breakaway. So all these tiny details, I bloody love it. And then you see other teams, okay, this team is passive. I think they should have tried to go in the breakaway because let's be honest about it, they're going to lose a stage, stuff like that. And then when it comes to sprint stages, maybe Andrew, this is an interesting one in my opinion. On one end, if you're Tudor Pro Cycling at the Giro, you've got Dainese as sprinter, Milan and Merlier are cleaning the sprint stages. Dainese on paper is never going to beat Milan and Merlier, but there's always a chance it happens because cycling is cycling. There's unpredictable things that happen. But on the other hand, from a mental perspective, Tudor probably thinks, okay, we need to show Dainese that we're supporting him. We're going to just ride all day for him. We're going to help Little Trek and Quickstep control the breakaway from the peloton. But indirectly, they're helping Little Trek and Quickstep reduce their energy expenditure with their domestiques during the stage, helping those teams actually having a full-on lead out in the sprint against Dainese. So, hot take, in my opinion, sprinters that are not winning and are unlikely to win a sprint, from a realistic standpoint, if you're their DS, I think it would be an interesting thing to go to that rider and saying, okay, you're Caleb Ewan. We've got Demarchi in the team. He's on paper not helping with your sprint train. How about we found a way for Demarchi to help your chances at winning the stage? How about we send Demarchi in the breakaway, not necessarily to win the sprint, no, to win from the breakaway, but to make it harder for your opposing sprinter teams to control, reducing their energy. And in that way, you come to a sprint, and we've got our riders except Demarchi to position you. But those other teams, they've spent Gebre, they might have spent Don Hole, Little Trek. They spend a few more riders than they would have done if we weren't in the breakaway. We just made it harder for them. which increases your chances of winning the sprint. Do you think if you're that sprinter, you either see that as, okay, that might improve my chances, or you see that as, my team doesn't believe in me?
Benji, if you propose this idea to the team, they're going to say, sounds great. You get to have that conversation with Caleb Ewan. I mean,
especially with Caleb.
Yeah, I think what you're saying probably logically is true, except in the case of like Tadej Naesen, where he has no business winning Giro stages a lot of times, and then he just magically wins the 18th stage for reasons we don't fully understand as a society. But
the stages always have negative altitude difference, and I think Andrew needs to go.
I mean, this is like we're going not just deep, we're going subterranean. Andrew, we're super deep now.
What do you think Caleb Ewan would say if you said that?
I think Caleb Ewan would say, "Is this a podcast where I can insult someone?" Because I think Caleb Ewan would insult you if you say that to him.
You'd probably lose him. I mean, that's probably the boring answer to your
but then
question.
Again, kind of lost him anyway. So
well, we didn't get into Cav winning his stage either, but I think we could do we could do another hour about it. He's definitely winning a stage, and maybe that's where I drop the mic and you guys can continue. But I do have to go disrupt an industry right now.
All right,
so
it was nice to meet you again, and I wish you the best in the coming year until I see you again for the 4th time on this podcast next year.
Yeah, Benji month next year, May, be there.
Yeah, I think the next time we see each other, we'll all probably have a 7 watts per kilogram FTP. So let's just continue.
It's only a matter of time. 2029 maybe.
That's the actual singularity when the 3 of us converge on a 7 watts per kilogram FTP.
Team time trial.
I'm just a few deadlifts away from it, I think. Next year is the year I'm back in the world tour. But yeah, great to see you, Benji. Great to catch up. Always good to go deep. And it's going to be a hell of a tour.
All right. Thanks. And have a good day.